A couple of years ago, I built this industrial style machinist chair, which quite a few viewers went on and made for themselves. I've always wanted to make a few other different design ones, so I modelled this one in Shaper 3D, which I'll make in this video. I already have just about everything I need, including this old pipe that I'll use for the main column. But the first thing I'll make is the three legs, which will be from 16 gauge or 1.6mm sheet steel. I'll fold each of them into a box, and because they're tapered from the side and tapered from the top, I'll mark them out with templates. I'm using my metal cutting circular saw and a jig or guide that I made a while ago. I used the jig heaps and I found it super useful, making it a really worthwhile project. I'm grinding to the line but not being super precise, as they'll be fine-tuned after they've been folded. I've set the height of the saw to make shallow cuts for the bends, and the cut will be half the thickness of the steel. This was the main reason for making the jig, but I find I use it all the time just for cutting blanks. This method works great, and if you did want to bend this with a brake, you would need quite an expensive one. To bend 16 gauge steel, you'd need a brake that starts around $3,000, and that's just for a cheap one here in Australia anyway. For smaller boxes and trays, I just put the blank in the vise and then bend it by hand. I'll show that in the original video of making the jig. I'll put a link above. With these legs, it would be difficult to even do on a brake, as the three bends are so close to each other. So this works well for this situation, as the bend wants to follow the cut anyway. I just need a piece clamped to it to give it some leverage and just to make sure that it stays perfectly flat. Obviously the corners aren't as strong with making those cuts, but they're way stronger than what's needed here. The start and the end don't quite match up, but I can easily grind them down to get a good fit. Since I've been getting so much positive feedback for my marking knife, also known as the Dart, I thought that I would put together a special promo for the release of this video. So if you click the link in the description below, for the next short while, if you purchase the Dart, I'll also include 11 of my premium woodwork plans as a bonus to say thank you for all the support that's been coming in. The offer won't be available for long, so make sure to check that out and click the link in the description. And as always, thanks for the support. That's the box sections for the legs done. Now I'll make some feet out of 1-inch bar, and actually it is 24mm, but that's close enough. The welds may not be super pretty, but they're good enough, and it doesn't matter how good they are anyway, as it still needs to be grinded back smooth for a seamless finish. Once there's some filler and paint on, they'll look fine. Now I can think about the column and attaching the legs to it. Before I do grind in those notches, I'll trim up the ends first. The base is just about done for now, so I'll move on to the top section, which is the seat. And I've changed my mind on the design. I was going to use this collar, and that would slide over the top and the seat would get attached to this. I was going to put a cap on this piece here and a cap on there and put a plastic disc in between. The idea of that is so I could swivel, and I think that may have worked, but I'm not 100% sure if there'd be too much friction still. Maybe, maybe not. But anyway, I've changed my mind. I'm going to use a Lazy Susan, but I am going to use the collar as well. I'm going to do that because I think it'll look better, and also it'll be a bit more support for that plate. Before I weld on the collar and plate, I'll clean out the middle of the pipe while I can get at both ends. To centre punch the marks, I'll use my carbide centre punch that my mate Corey makes. I have a fair set of his tools now, and they're all amazing with awesome knurl patterns. If you'd like to check out his tools, I'll put a link in the description with a code so you can get free international shipping. That's the base just about done, so next I'll start making the seat. I'd like it to be plywood, and I also want the front to curve over. I've decided to cut veneers from these reclaimed brushbox floorboards and make my own plywood, and then I can bend the seat using forms. That's the plan anyway. I've never made plywood before, so let's see how it goes. I've put a thin kerf ripsaw blade on the table saw, which lets me get 3 pieces from each board. I sanded them down to 1.3mm, which seemed like it would bend nicely, and I cut a fair amount more than what I actually needed just in case. I've cut all the pieces to 2 different lengths, one for the grain to run in one direction and the other to run in the opposite. Next I need to trim the edges so I have straight edges to glue them together. I cut some thinner strips to make up the size of the panel I need, and just like regular plywood, each layer will have the grain running perpendicular to the one before. I think you get the idea. The first thing I'll do is glue up each individual layer first, otherwise I think it will all move around too much when I come to laminate the layers together. I did one as a test and it held together well, so then I did the rest of them. I also glued together the layers for the backrest. The form was pretty simple. I just glued together a couple of pieces of plywood and some pine, and next I'll curve over the one edge. I was very hopeful about this and it was going well until the nozzle snapped off on the vacuum bag. I had to work fast, so I didn't get a chance to film it, but I grabbed ratchet straps, clamps, weights, and somehow try and salvage the situation. I put the straps on first and the top veneer started cracking, so I grabbed an old metal sign and put that on top to spread the force. Hopefully that works. All I can do now is wait for it to set and hope it's okay. Anyway, I made a form for the backrest and glued that up as well. That went much better, so I left them overnight to set. I still had some time left in the day though, so I started to make the support for the backrest from a piece of 40 by 6mm steel bar. I'm using the stop collar on the top of the fly press to limit the travel and keep a consistent bend. I did a few passes changing the position of the stop collar until the bend matched the template. The stop collar is such an awesome feature and it's one of the things that makes the fly press such a great tool, keeping things repeatable and consistent. I'll weld it to the plate later on, but that's it for the day. The next morning I removed the straps and clamps to see what disaster awaited me, and it actually looks okay other than the cracks that I mentioned, but hopefully they may stand out. If only the vacuum bag didn't fail and I wouldn't have had the crack on the top and it would have been perfect. I'm cleaning up one edge with a hand plane to make it straight and true. Then I can use that as a reference to trim the rest on the table saw, and straight away I can see that the plywood is pretty spectacular. I tilted the blade to 45 degrees and made the cut, but I did tilt it over a touch more and trimmed it again off camera, and that was to make the edge perpendicular to the front slope of the seat. I'll fix up the couple of cracks with CA glue, and while that sets I'll trim up the backrest. Even though there's still more to do, I couldn't resist taking a look at it together. Next I'll make a cross support for the backrest. It needs to match the curve of the plywood, and by the way this piece is going to be height adjustable. Next I'll make a slot in the vertical support, which the other piece will slide in. I'll do it on the milling machine just to move things along, but this could easily be done with a drill and files or even an angle grinder or jigsaw, so you really don't need to have expensive equipment. There's no excuse, and most things can be done with basic tools. The cross piece needs a key to locate the slot and prevent it from swiveling. These holes are the correct size to tap them for M4 threads, but before I do that I'll use a transfer punch to mark the holes onto the support piece. Next I need a bolt for attaching and tightening the backrest in position. I will make the slot a touch longer later on, but first I'll make a wing nut. I could just weld a couple of tabs onto a nut like this, but I reckon I can do something much nicer, even though it may be a bit over the top. I need to turn down a section just so I can hold it in a collet for a later operation on the milling machine. The largest collet I have is 20mm and the bowl is a touch larger than that. I'll mill a slot to put a piece of flat bar through to make the wings, which will then get welded in place. I'll weld it in place, but first I'll cut a section out to make it fit, but still keep plenty of the threads clear. I could have just welded a tab on either side, but this only took a few minutes and the two wings will be perfectly in line. That's a fair amount of weld to grind off. I probably should have TIG welded it, which I was going to do, but on this multi-process machine I can never be bothered to remove the wire, change the gun, and then there's the gas to change as well. That's why I always manage with MIG welding unless I have a very good reason not to. I need a dedicated TIG welder. Anyway, I still would have had to grind the weld, and it actually only took a few minutes using these cheap burrs in the Dremel. I did a final sand, mainly taking off the edges, and I have to say that I'm super happy with it and I'm glad I went to the trouble to make it. That works perfectly. I've decided to weld the screw in from the back to secure it. I'll grind some off the head first so I can get in there to get some weld around it. I put some weld across the other screws as well. After grinding it off, there isn't much weld left, but enough to stop the screws from turning. I'll grind a slight radius on the ends to finish them, and then I can weld the main support onto the base. I got carried away and drilled the through holes before drilling out a recess for the head of the bolts. I can still do it though with the seat clamped down to the drill press table. It just would have been easier to do it first. That's everything just about done and ready to paint. First though, I need to clean it up a bit. I did put a few coats on, and in between those coats I started finishing the seat and the backrest. Before I put it on the ground, I'll quickly make some plastic feet, but I had to try it out first, and I reckon it's great. I'm using this nylon for the first time, and the surface finish is nowhere near as nice as Delrin, which I usually use, and I do actually have some. Anyway, they're fine, so I'll still use them. I was thinking of screwing them on from underneath or even just gluing them, but as they're a good tight fit, they don't need it, and I couldn't actually get them back off. Anyway, there it is. It's all done. I'm super happy with it, and I still think I may make other vintage style chairs like this. I have a couple of other designs I'd still like to make. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to check out the marking knife and plan bundle. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.